Okay. So, you know, in the introduction to the Jewish War, Josephus says some things that are extremely interesting. Sometimes it's worth, I don't mean the editor's introduction, I mean his own introduction. People don't realize how modern these writers were at that time. The reason we're bothering with Josephus so much is, first of all, the background he gives to the history, and we're doing history. But second of all, the fact that it's one of the impressions out there, that has been for maybe a century or so, that some of the writers of the New Testament were using Josephus, or were dependent on Josephus. And to make such an evaluation, you have to look at Josephus. Otherwise, how would you be able to determine yourself whether anyone was using him? I mean, you can talk about it, but you can't know yourself, or suspect yourself, or even theorize yourself that Josephus has been used by authors of the New Testament. I think certainly the book of Acts is aware and is incorporating material from Josephus. But primarily it seems they're incorporating material if we agree that they are. We don't have to agree at that point. That's you. You're the final arbiter. In other words, you're the courtroom. I'm just the prosecuting attorney. Some of you are the defense attorneys. But the only thing here is to evaluate the evidence and decide for yourself. You're the ones who make the final judgment, not me. You're the ones who have to live your lives. I've already lived most of mine. So you're the ones who make your decision for yourself. So you look at evidence and data and you weigh it. Josephus doesn't, the book of Acts, even the book of Acts, if it's using Josephus, particularly in the beginning parts, doesn't seem to be using the war that we're looking at as much as the antiquities. There's material in the antiquities that seems to float into the book of Acts. I can show you that at some point. I probably will, but I don't need to do it at the moment because I just want to look at this introduction. But since we've got the war in a cheap edition, and I told you the difference between the war and the antiquities, anyone want to quick summarize what the difference between Josephus' war and antiquities is? Or are? When was the war written? Right after the war.
76 maybe?
No, earlier, probably around 73 or 74. Right after the war. I'll read you the introduction here and he'll tell you. So that's pretty dead on as far as events in Palestine go relating to Jesus. In other words, Jesus would have appeared, if we can agree on the dates, or if we think we have the dates right, perhaps 40 years before, or thereabouts. And the Antiquities was written when?
96.
I think 93 or 94.
He died in 96?
Well, we don't know. He disappears from the, seems to evaporate by 96. And some people think he lived till 104 AD, not years. I think he says when he was born in his Vita. There's another book called the Vita, which is the autobiography, which is very interesting. You know, we use our curriculum Vita, or our biography, our autobiography, our life. It means life. I think he says he was born around 38 AD or something like that. You know, something, so if he died in 96 would make him up close to 60. If he died in 104 or something, it would make him late 60s, early 70s. But I don't think he died a natural death. I think he was swept up in the suppressions that occurred under the Emperor Domitian.
Was he anti-Jewish?
Wait a moment. Under the Emperor Domitian, wow, I'll just keep on writing. There, I did wrote them all pretty quick in descending order here. These should be second nature to you, these people. You're going to study this period. I mean, you didn't probably learn them in high school, and probably you haven't learned them in many other courses in college. But in a course like this, historical, Jesus, the accent on historical, you really ought to know this kind of thing like second nature, who the Roman emperors were at any given moment. And I can't give you the dates precisely, but I think we can say that I think Claudius, he didn't die a natural death. He didn't die a natural death. These two, I think, died a natural death. He didn't die a natural death. He died a natural death. He died a natural death. I don't think he died a natural death. Domitian. In fact, I think he was killed by a Christian. The rumor is that he was killed by one, interestingly enough, a slave called Stephen, a Christian slave. And Stephen is a famous name in Christianity. In the book of Acts, you have the stoning of Stephen as the archetypical Gentile believer. Stephen is the person who Paul addresses as the first fruits of Achaia in the letter to the Corinthians. That doesn't mean it's the same Steve. Obviously, the dates wouldn't gel there, but still, it's interesting that's someone who. Wherever you find this material, a lot of this material is in Suetonius and other Roman historians of this period called the 12 Caesars. Really interesting reading because it's extremely raunchy. Suetonius liked to appeal to his audience. Josephus is pretty raunchy when he gets down to it. And people wanted to get an audience then, and so the more lurid what they could present in the writings, the more people were likely to read it. So that was an important point too. So Josephus wrote the Antiquities around 93 or 94, and he wrote the Vita around that time too. And I think, let me see if I get my dates here right. Domitian was in the last stages and getting a little bit nasty by that time. Titus, I think, died in, jeepers, I don't want to make any mistakes here. 81, I think. I think he died in 79. He definitely dies or is assassinated in 96. This one definitely is assassinated in 68, I think. Claudius died either 54 or 56, I can't remember which, I think it's 56, assassinated. Caligula was assassinated, and I think, let me see, Tiberius died around 37 or so, and he died around, I think, 41 or 44. I forget, you can check the back of my James book. Augustus died around 14 or so.
14?
Yeah, something. I think so, somewhere there. So, no, I just said they weren't all assassinated. I told you they weren't all assassinated. Who said that?
Who was saying assassinated? Or like Claudius?
Yeah, some were assassinated, some weren't. I told you the ones who died naturally. I told you. Who did I say died naturally?
Titus,
Titus,
Tiberius,
Tiberius, Augustus, that's not all, Vespasian. So, and all the ones I said, all these were, you know, anyway, it's good to, a lot of them were assassinated, who were particularly unpopular, but also popular. Claudius was quite popular, I think. But Claudius had a lot of trouble with his women. He wasn't a very handsome or attractive person. And he got involved with some questionable wife types. Not even clear he liked being married, or if he did, he turned his head. And he was an intellectual, Claudius. He had hidden in the background. There's a great public television thing done on Claudius, which gives you tremendous insight into this period, called I, Claudius. Anyone ever seen that on public television? Before your time? Well, you would, and I would. It's in our time. It was a BBC, I think about 8-part docudrama. It wasn't wonderful, wonderful. Best thing I've ever seen on historical docudramas on television. If you ever go to the videos, rent store places, it's out there someplace, I, Claudius. It's worth picking up and looking at. It really is. It's based on a book by Robert Graves, the English poet, but it's really good. Tremendous acting and gives you an insight in the spirit where it saw Claudius. It's a biography from Claudius's point of view that he purposely made himself invisible at the court, and they thought he was an idiot so that he could avoid these assassinations and poisonings that were going on in the wake of Augustus's reign. Augustus's wife Livia was a little bit power mad, and he, Augustus, didn't have any children by her. She was a later wife that he obviously became infatuated with, and she dominated him, and she was very power mad. So she eliminated all of the actual offspring of Augustus by previous wives, and through poisoning and things. And I think Claudius was one of those people who actually was a distant offspring of Augustus through a nephew or something like that. Popular nephew called Germanicus after some victories in Germany. Anyway, I, Claudius really does give you tremendous insight into this. And the thesis was that he made believe that he was crazy and that he was stupid, that he was a simpleton, and that he was a cripple and everything. He was a cripple, but so that they wouldn't consider him emperor material and they wouldn't bother assassinating or poisoning. I think he was either the cousin or of Caligula.
Claudius.
Yeah, or could have been his brother for that. I'm not sure. Could have been his older brother, but anyway, Caligula came through much more, much sooner than Claudius, even though Claudius was older. But Caligula was quite mad. He was assassinated for sure. Now, Suetonius gives you the biographies of all these people. So it's really worth it. If you like ancient history, don't read about it, go and read it. Just don't read second-hand, third-hand books. You know, it's like reading a Clinton speech or something. Don't read what Clinton says. Go and look at the events yourself, or Bush for that matter, whichever. I just happened to hear Clinton on who's that guy on public television? Larry King, interviewing, throwing softballs at him. I mean, it was pathetic to hear his view of Middle Eastern history, and just, it was pseudo-intellectually informed, but only pseudo-intellectually informed, and sort of made you like, I'd rather some ignoramus like Bush, who doesn't pretend to know anything, rather than someone who pretends to know something, but actually doesn't know any more than the other guy. Okay, never mind. Regard to the first-hand sources, really. think that's always a good thing to do. Because Clinton likes to present himself as being Mr. Intellectual, Mr. Know-it-all, Mr. Know this, know that, and everything else. And yeah, he does know a lot, but it's sometimes very skewed and superficial, usually aggrandizing himself and egocentric. But in any event, going back to our period, it's good to go to the sources, and Suetonius is a good source. What other Roman historians cover this period? There are really only two. Tacitus, who wrote two books, one called the Annals, and I think the other's called the Histories. The Annals goes year by year. And all these people are writing more like around 100 AD. And then there is someone that's running a little later, Dio Cassius. He's usually called Dio. Those are the guys, if you want the Roman histories to look at for the horse's mouth of what's going on from a Roman point of view in this period. Yeah.
Are all of them pretty consistent with each other? Is there a lot of differences between their?
They're pretty consistent. Some of them are dependent on each other, but they give it extra detail here or there. Yeah.
I'm wondering from the point of view of a Roman, average Roman, or a Roman farmer, how big was the Jewish war? I know it's big for us.
Yeah, I'm going to get to that in a minute and read the preface. But I don't think the farmer gave a hoot about these things. You didn't have instant television like we have. These were events happening maybe 3 months away from where they were living. I mean, it took maybe 2 or 3 months for any information to get back to them. By that time, all the big events would have transpired. So I don't think the Roman farmer, the Roman aristocrat in the Senate, these are important events for the Roman aristocrat in the Senate. If you want to get now, there's another TV thing that I've been mentioning to you. If you want to get a good picture of that, what you're talking about, the class system in Rome, and the different way the aristocrats might have approached things than the members in the army or even more lower people than that. This docudrama we've had on recently, Rome, that's on HBO, though it is a little bit, again, lurid, a lot of sexuality in it, not too much soft porn, but sexuality, because like the modern audience, like the ancient audience, the modern audience has to be attracted to as well. You can't put a series on TV without something to lure them in. But that covers the period, as I told you, from Julius Caesar and Pompey down to the assassination of Julius Caesar, and then the rise of Mark Antony and Octavius, who later becomes Augustus. And they're having a second series, a second season is being prepared now. Will start, I think, next March of that. So this one went down to the assassination of Julius Caesar. I think the rest will go down through Cleopatra, Mark Antony and Cleopatra. They introduced Cleopatra and stuff. So they could, with Cleopatra, they could bring a lot of sex into it. And also Augustus's sister was pretty wild, and there's some lesbian stuff in it, and a lot of that kind of stuff. Of course, the Romans were into all that stuff. So sex every which way was the Roman diet, and that's just the way it went. And everyone wanted to be in Caesar's bed, supposedly, and according to everyone, all the gossip of Caesar, every woman in Rome had been in, or Caesar had been in the bed of every woman in Rome just about, and this Rome series tries to portray that as his downfall, that one of his jilted women, who was very vengeful, that's the plot of this Rome series, was Brutus's mother. And Brutus actually, if you read Julius Caesar of Shakespeare, it was one of the assassins, chief assassin of Caesar. But Caesar doted on him, and many said that he was an illegitimate son of Caesar. So part of the plot of that Rome is to show Brutus's mother taking vengeance for having been jilted by Caesar, by putting it into her son's head over and over again to kill, the person who had done her wrong, and so on and so forth. So all that's pretty good in the Rome series, and that's clearly taken from Roman historians, directed from Roman historians. And the drama is pretty good. It's not as good as I Claudius, but if you watch the two of those, if you don't like reading history books, you'll start to get a picture, and that gives you a good picture, I think, of the peasantry, of the estates, of the different levels of the population. what each are concerned about and so on. The population, was happy about the Jewish war because they didn't know anything about it after it was over, but then they could have a big triumph and bring all the prisoners to Rome and be a lot of slaves for sale, and they could watch the big processions and the executions. They loved to watch executions, apparently. And then they could use the money from the sacking of the temple to build the Colosseum, where the big execution displays were staged in terms of fights and sporting events and blood sports and that kind of thing. I mean, the Colosseum wasn't built for dramatic theater. It was built for blood sport, and people seem to respond to that. The mass responded to that, and so they were, I think, entertained by whatever the winning parties had achieved in the Jewish war. But to go back to Josephus, which got us on this in the first place, Josephus' second book, 93, 94, Vita, the same time, and I think something happened in here, Domitian's time. There were Christians in the imperial household. What's the best evidence that there were Christians in the imperial household that you know? Well, if you read Eusebius' History of the Early Church, he says it directly. But what's the best? I mean, talking about the imperial household of Nero and not so much, Nero's wife was interested in religious things, Josephus tells us. Her name was Poppaea. And there's endless interesting things here. And she met Josephus, she liked Josephus. According to Josephus, he got involved with her through a Jewish actor in Rome. And Nero liked to be on the stage. And Josephus says in his Vita that she liked him and sent him away with many gifts. Yeah, I'm talking about, this is Nero's wife. Did I say?
I thought you said Domitius, but.
No, this is Nero's wife. Domitian comes. I'm going to talk about Domitian's household. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I'm talking about the household of these people. So this starts in Nero's time. People in the household of the emperor. Christians in the household of the emperor. Now, whether she's a Christian or a Jewish sympathizer isn't clear, depending on what you think Christianity is at this point. I'm talking about Poppaea, but she's a sympathizer. Funnily, she gets to know him through a Jewish actor. Josephus says she sent him away laden with gifts. Now, he'd be about 26 years old at that time. He went to Rome on a mysterious visit of some kind that he discusses in his Vita, to rescue two priests who had gone to Rome to appeal to Caesar. Now, Paul talks about, or at least the book of Acts talks about Paul's famous appeal to Caesar, where the Herodian kings say to Paul in Acts about 25, 26, the scene is Felix, the Roman governor, a very, very brutal person, Drusilla, a Herodian princess, who divorced someone on Simon Magus's advice to marry Felix. How do I know all this stuff? I mean, I know you're looking baffled. I read my Josephus. It's all in Josephus. Everything is in Josephus. Nobody reads it carefully. No religious people, no secular people. And, I read them about 30 times. So after you read them about 30 times, you get it all in your brain. So Simon Magus, he's in there too? Yeah, he's in there. He's like a Rasputin type that makes it possible for Drusilla to divorce her husband, which was against Jewish law. But Josephus tells us she had already left the religion of her ancestors, Judaism. And then she marries the Roman governor, Felix, who's very, very brutal. At the Dead Sea Scrolls, divorce and polygamy are very big subjects, condemned very aggressively. In any case, Simon Magus is the big evil person for Christian history. And the apostles are supposed to be against him. But see, I don't think they're against him just for the issue of competing over taking money for ministry activity, which is what Acts tries to present the situation between Peter and Simon Magus. I think there must be bigger issues than that. And I think the issues are to be found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. He makes it possible for rulers to divorce. He keeps company with rulers and people like that. I don't think they do. Paul does, but they don't. Anyway, I can't picture Jesus making it possible for a ruler, a Herodian ruler, to divorce his wife to marry a Roman governor. It just seems to be outside his ken. Okay, in any case, at this scene with Paul, there's Drusilla, and then there's Agrippa II. You say, well, who's Agrippa II? He's another Herodian king, son of Agrippa I, and Bernice, his sister, who Josephus covers in great detail, who also divorced a lot of husbands and so on, and she ended up the mistress of Titus, the destroyer of Jerusalem and the temple. Titus treated her like Caesar 100 years before had treated Cleopatra. So what's this got to do with anything? This is how you evaluate Paul and show where he was at, where his mindset was. That the book of Acts is accurate here. Now, I mentioned, I think, parts of Acts. The first part of Acts, I'm filling in background for you here still, 1 to 15, which is sort of spotty and hard to follow and full of miracle stories and sketchy, somewhat made up, I think. From Acts 16 somewhere to the end, we have the we document come in. I told you something about the fact there is a we document. And the pseudo-clementines that I've also mentioned, and I've read to you from, are also expressed in the form of we. We did this, we did that, we went here, we went there, like a report to somebody. So why I think the pseudo-clementines are parallel to the book of Acts in many ways. They are an anti-Acts from a different point of view. A pro-Palestinian, not pro-Pauline. Acts is a pro-Pauline book. Paul is the hero of Acts. And Paul is introduced to us in Acts. First as an opponent of Christianity, then his vision is described, then we follow his missionary journeys, and all the other apostles are forgotten. And basically we end up with Paul in Rome under loose house arrest, being visited by everybody who wanted to see him and paying for his own lodgings, and not in a terribly serious situation, it would seem, in 62, and then it cuts off. But I always ask the question, why does Acts stop in 62? Didn't they know what happened in 63, 64, 65, 66? Didn't the writers know? Oh, sure they did. Why did they stop? Maybe there was something worrisome. I don't know why they stopped. What happened in 62 they should have included? Any serious redactor of the Acts of the Apostles would have included the most important event that happened in 62. The death of James, the leader of the church in Jerusalem. No one ever thinks, well, here's what we have. Yeah, but here's what we don't have. Why? Oh, it just happened that way. Did the authors know it? Sure the authors knew it. How could they not know it? It was the most important event that happened in history of our early church in that year. I'm not saying the most important event of all in the church, but in that year, certainly. Not Paul's being under loose house arrest in Rome. That's not the most, that's an interesting point, but that's not the most important event in 62. Why does Acts just trail off in 62? Well, I think it had reasons. It underplays James throughout. Anyway, forget that. If I were writing Acts, it wouldn't end there, put it that way. So, there'd be more in it than that. But so we have to say that Acts, books have agendas. The authors have axes to grind, not axe to grind, but axes to grind. So you always have to think of that. So anyway, at the end of Acts, the last 4 or 5 chapters, Paul is keeping very congenial company with all these murderous people. One even says, if a little more Paul, Agrippa 2 says that, and I would be a Christian. These are the people whose palaces the revolutionaries burned down at the beginning of the war against Rome 5 or 6 years later, as the enemies of the Jewish people. Why would they, what was going on here when you read your Josephus? And then Bernice is accused of incest with her brother, Agrippa too. And actually does come in on his arm, as, so quasi-consort of some kind. Is she having incest with her brother? We don't know. But anyway, later on then, Titus, the son of Vespasian, who continues the siege of Jerusalem in 68-69 after his father goes back to fight for the emperorship in Rome, after Nero's assassinated in 68, and Vespasian emerges the winner, Titus continues the siege of Jerusalem and then finally destroys the temple and so on and so forth, with advice from people like Bernice and her brother, who are in his entourage. Why wouldn't they save the temple? Oh, because they'd been barred from the temple and they were very angry. Their great-grandfather Herod had built the temple or rebuilt it in its present form. It had only been finished a few years before, but they were happy to see it go. They saw it as the hotbed of revolutionary activity in Palestine in this period. So the picture of Jesus throwing out the money lenders from the temple in the Gospels, I think is a revolutionary act in that context. There's disturbances, insurgency activity in the temple. Gospel of Mark says he stopped traffic in the temple for a whole day. Well, what do you mean? How could he stop traffic? Nobody could come and go. Well, he had to have an entourage powerful enough to do that. That would be an attack on the temple in some way. Attack on the impurity of the temple. John says, zeal for my Father's house consumes me. Portrays Jesus as a kind of zealot. Zeal is the key phrase for zealotry. Okay, so I was talking about Christians in the imperial household. So I said I said about Josephus and so on, so we got on all those topics. But Josephus met Poppaea. Poppaea, he says, was interested in religious causes. After he left, went away with gifts, she said she treated him very well. What year would this be about? Oh my God, it's hard I can't ever get the dates of these things straight, but somewhere in the mid to late 50s. I think he was 26 years old, so it could be around 54, 55 maybe, AD. Shortly thereafter, no, I think it was later than that. I think it was in the 60s. Anyway, I've always got my dates on this particular thing wrong. You can check it up better than me. 30, no, actually it would be in the early 60s because he was born in 38, so 26, then about 64. Yeah, 64, right before the war against Rome. Yeah, that's more like it. 63, 64, somewhere in there. Anyway, Poppaea is apparently pregnant at some point right after that. I mean, you could even say that Josephus had something to do with that, yeah. He seems quite pleased with himself, like a popinjay of some kind. I think he definitely entered Roman service at that point. He made the contacts in Rome to enter Roman service. But anyway, I mean, because he does, though he's commander in Galilee when he gets back, he very quickly knows people in the Roman camp who know him and whom he knows, so that when he decides not to commit suicide and draws the short straw and kills the others and then surrenders and proclaims Vespasian the Messiah, pretty quick activity, right? First he meets Poppaea, and then he proclaims Vespasian Messiah, all kinds of interesting things. Josephus is a really interesting character. He'd already laid the contacts, the groundwork for those contacts in his trip to Rome, I believe. He met a lot of interesting, important people. Okay, what about these Christians in the imperial household? Well, let's look at Paul here. In Thessalonians, See if I can find, not Thessalonians, Philippians. Look at Philippians a minute. Again, I'm getting the background here, but all this is interesting for you to evaluate stuff. Philippians, how many have read Philippians? Nobody. Okay. Well, let's see, it's good, it's good. It's a very short letter. You can read it in like 10 minutes. Paul is going on, he's writing people at Philippi in Greece. Talks in 11 about the fruits of righteousness, Jesus Christ, living in Jesus Christ, and so on. Salvation for Christ's sake, that's chapter 1. And then he suddenly mentions in line 24 of chapter 2. So I hope to send him at once whenever I've seen how things go with me. But I trust in the Lord I also shall come shortly to Philippi, talking about Timothy and others going there. Yet I thought it needful to send you Epaphroditus, my brother and fellow worker and soldier. Use soldier imagery here. But for you, your messenger. But the actual word, if you look at the Greek, there is apostolon. That's why the Greek is always so interesting. Look at the actual Greek here. That's why I told you get a linear because you can see it in front of you. We say messenger, but you see it says apostolon. So Epaphroditus is his apostle and the minister to my need. So this Epaphroditus is really important in this letter, and this is considered to be a pretty important letter, and an authentic letter. Look, chapter 3. Look out for dogs. Some scurrilous allusion there about dogs. Anyway, it goes on about being circumcised on the 8th day of the race of Israel. You see, he never mentions Jew here. He never mentions Judah, tribe of Judah. He's a race of Israel, tribe of Benjamin. There are no Benjaminites left at this time. What does he mean by the tribe of Benjamin? Why is he of the tribe of Benjamin? What's he implying there? How does he see himself? Well, who was the famous person in Jewish history who's of the tribe of Benjamin? 1,000 years before. 1,000 years before. No, maybe more than that. Maybe 1,100 years before.
Jonathan?
Jonathan is, yeah. And who else? Who's Jonathan's father?
Oh, David?
No.
No, Saul.
Saul. And what's Paul's name?
Saulus.
Saul. Does he call himself of the tribe of Benjamin because he knows Saul was of the tribe of Benjamin? Is that why he's calling himself? I, Saul, of the tribe of Benjamin? Or is there really a tribe of Benjamin around at this time? Well, the Jews were using Benjamin to allude to converts often. And the Herodian family would have considered itself of the Benjamin tribe, as I go into very clearly in my book why that is. Hebrew of the Hebrews. Anyway, I don't want to go too deep of that. What is, you see, the Herodians were considered to be Edomites. What's the genealogy of the Edomites? The genealogy of the Edomites, they're from Esau. Who's Esau, son of Israel? Or he's the son of Isaac, rather, the brother of Jacob, and also, therefore, a descendant of Abraham. If you consider Abraham's descendants Hebrews, then he could easily consider himself as the Herodians could easily be making claims to being a Hebrew of the Hebrews, if you look at the ancient genealogies. But forget all of that. I don't want to get into that now. It goes on in this situation, and he ends up in chapter 4, the end. I can do all things through Christ, line 13, who strengthens me. But you, having fellowship with me in troubles, you know Philippians. That's in Macedonia, in northern Greece. That in the beginning, when I came out of Macedonia, no church shared me as to going and receiving, but you only. Because even in Thessalonica, you sent both once and again for my need. Now, Not that I look for gifts, but I look to the fruit that multiplies the account. He likes a little fundraising here and there. But I have all things, and more than enough, and I am full, receiving from, and now he mentions Epaphroditus the second time. Epaphroditus, the things from you, an odor of sweet smell, an acceptable sacrifice, well-pleasing to God. The contributions are an odor of sweet sacrifice. They take the place of temple sacrifice. That's in Judaism too. Tzedakah, charity, takes the place of temple sacrifice. But my God will fill all your need according to his riches in the glory of Jesus. Now my glory be to God and our faith forever and ever. Amen. Greet every saint of Christ Jesus. The brothers with me greet you. All the saints greet you, and especially those in the household of Caesar. There it is. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with you all. So, and it says, to the Philippians, written from Rome by Epaphroditus. That's the ending of it there, which I don't have in my translation, but that's the ending in the actual Greek. Well, the point is that he sends Epaphroditus to the saints in the household of Caesar. Now, this would be somewhere in the mid-50s, perhaps, also. Well, do you know who Josephus dedicates all his work to? The person who, in fact, sponsored all his writings in the household of Caesar? It's Epaphroditus. Epaphroditus is Josephus, and by this time, Epaphroditus is Nero's secretary for Greek letters. Now, I don't know if this is the same Epaphroditus or a different Epaphroditus, but there's not too many Epaphroditus running around at that time, I don't think. And ultimately, Epaphroditus is involved in the assassination of Nero. Epaphroditus, Josephus describes Epaphroditus, and I think this is the link between Josephus and Paul. These are the same two individuals. Epaphroditus is an extremely close colleague of, I'm giving you really intimate stuff here that most people never dig out. Epaphroditus, as you see, is a really intimate colleague, Paul's closest associate in some ways. He calls him his fellow soldier and worker. Josephus says Epaphroditus had a very exciting career, did many things, was, a very interesting person, standout person, had, a very rich background of some kind, but he's not, doesn't go into it, but he does praise him in the Vita and in other parts of the Antiquities as the person sponsored all his works and for whom he wrote his works. Now, Epaphroditus is executed finally. I don't know if this is Epaphroditus or another Epaphroditus. In Domitian's time, as a secret Christian. As a secret Christian. Domitian was executing by that time in the 90s, secret Christian. I think if Epaphroditus was executed, but actually the excuse Domitian uses, which is absurd, all the Roman historians tell you, is that he raised his hand against an emperor. That is, supposedly he helped Nero commit suicide by holding the sword that when Nero was being run after by his Praetorian Guard, that Nero ran on his sword, supposedly that Epaphroditus held for him or something like that. So, I mean, even though he supposedly did it at Nero's request to escape the other people who were going to kill him, again, it's all right. Aren't you following me? It's the gossip of the period, but it's really interesting. Anyway, so the charge against Epaphroditus by Domitian is that he raised his hand against an emperor. But for 20 years, Domitian didn't seem to mind that Epaphroditus had raised his hand against an emperor or whatever, or helped an emperor die or whatever. This was just a cooked-up charge to get rid of him. But it seems that this, because Epaphroditus was a secret Christian, at the same time, Domitian executed people in his own family who were secret Christians. The people who actually were supposed to succeed him. A fellow called, see, this is the Flavian family. So this is Flavius Clemens. In other language, Clement. Now, who is the character that the Pseudo-Clementines are written in the name of? The Adventures of Clement. And the Pseudo-Clementines tell you that Clement is very early converted to Christianity and is of a very noble Roman family. a very high-born noble family. Very high-born noble Roman family. Clement also, according to Eusebius and others, is either the first or third pope in Rome, successor to Peter. Now, I don't know how or what you want to do with all that material, but finally there's a woman called Flavia, pardon me, let's see, Domitilla. That means she's a female Flavian. She's either the wife, niece, or daughter of Clement, Flavius Clement. I think she's the wife, but we don't know exactly. It's not clear. She may be the niece. Anyway, at the time that Domitian is executing all these people in the 90s, she's exiled or executed, I'm not sure which, to an island someplace. In any case, if you go to Rome today, have you heard of the catacombs where the Christian catacombs exist? The most famous and biggest Christian catacomb in Rome is which one? The Domitilla catacomb. Because it's named after Flavia Domitilla, because it was founded on her property, because she was a Christian. And Stephen, finally here we go, the one who assassinated Domitian, I think invented for all these things, was one of her servants, was one of her slaves. So anyway, that's about secret Christians in the imperial family. I think there are a substantial number of them, you know. And it's very odd, and it's the whole thing is very, it's very vague, obviously, but I try to cover it in my text. Anyway, so all of this has to do with when was Josephus executed, or did he die a natural death? I think he was swept up in all these things. He wouldn't have survived, in my view, Epaphroditus. Epaphroditus was his sponsor, his basically sugar daddy, patron, and so on. If Epaphroditus was assassinated for pro-Christian leanings or being a secret Christian, Josephus would have been executed too, it seems. And he's very worried in the Vita, which is written around 93, 94. He is defending himself against charges of disloyalty to Rome in the Vita. He tries to show that his activities on behalf of the rebels, insurgents in Palestine 20 years, 30 years before were not serious things, that he always supported Rome, etc., 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 etc. And he's bragging about what a big supporter of Rome he is, and so on and so forth. And against some books that are being written that to say that he's a, double agent or whatever you want to call it. I don't know if that interests you. I hope it does. Let's quickly then look at that really fills in a lot of history, by the way. This preface to the Jewish War. And you get finally what I'm trying to get at here. The War of the Jews against the Romans, preface to the Jewish War written by Josephus, was the greatest of our time. Greater, too, perhaps, than any recorded struggle. Now, that is just a bunch of bull. I mean, who is he aggrandizing there? The Flavians. Why? This is the Jewish war being written to honor Titus and Vespasian's exploits in conquering the Jews and destroying the temple. Josephus is going to absolve them of responsibility for destroying the temple, because he wants to say that that's sacrilege and these people wouldn't have done it. The Jews burned their own temple down on themselves. Just like the Christian documents say the Jews wanted to kill their own Messiah and stuff like that. And Jesus, don't forget, for Christianity is the temple. Interesting parallels there. But never mind. So he's really writing it to praise these people. You have to have big enemies, and it has to be an important victory to have any kind of honor. And he's comparing it to Julius Caesar's Gallic War. The reason he calls it the Jewish War is because the wars were named after the people you fought. Julius Caesar wrote his own praise in the Gallic War and the Civil War. The War of the Jews against Rome was the greatest of our time. Vespasian and Titus obviously couldn't write like Julius Caesar could, so they needed a Josephus to do it for them. That's the singular service he provided for the Flavian family, which is why he got the name Flavius Josephus. Just like these others, Flavia Domitilla, I'm sure that the Clemens in the Pseudo-Clementines is supposed to be this Clement, that this Flavius Clemens character at a younger age. My personal view. Yet person, perhaps than any recorded struggle, whether between cities or nations, yet persons with no first-hand knowledge, accepting baseless and inconsistent stories on hearsay. Here we go. Look at this and take it into your mind seriously, because Josephus is a liar, but he's accusing everyone else of being a liar too. He's not a total liar. He's only a liar where important things go. Yet persons with no first-hand knowledge, accepting baseless and inconsistent story on hearsay, have written garbled accounts of it, while those of eyewitnesses have been falsified, either to flatter the Romans or to vilify the Jews. Now here he wants to show that he honors his own people, and he wants to show not to vilify them, because he's proud of his Jewish background, but he also wants to make them as brave as he can so that the victory looks bigger than it might have been. But here it's interesting. Even Josephus says that at this time there are accounts circulating that are inconsistent, hearsay, false, garbled, lying accounts, and eyewitnesses, Gospels are supposed to be eyewitness accounts, don't forget, have been falsified, either to flatter the Romans or vilify the Jews. Now you watch the literature we're dealing with, the Gospel literature, and you see if there's any indication of flattering the Romans and vilifying the Jews in it. That's what he says the defect of historical writing in his period is. He says he's not going to suffer from that, but even he can't avoid it. So that's an important, I just read the preface just for that one thing, so people realize that even in 74 AD or so, around that time, whenever he wrote this preface, Josephus is saying there's material circulating, and probably can't do anything but do this if it wants to circulate, that flatters the Romans, that have been falsified, and eyewitnesses accounts the same to flatter the Romans and falsify the Jews. Is that a surprising thing? No. If literature is going to survive in this period, with the police state that you're dealing with, the very powerful, huge police state that you're dealing with, probably it would have to do that if it was going to survive. And therefore we have to be very careful about what we read that has survived from this period in the West Roman area, civilization area. Now in the East we have the Dead Sea Scrolls, but that didn't survive in this period. That was put in caves in this period and was hidden. So it is an example of literature that did not go through the editorial process of the Roman Empire. So therefore it is not full of flattery, and it is not vilifying Jews at all, the opposite. And it hates groups like the Romans. Now that group, that literature is hidden. And we're fortunate to have it. And finally it says, eulogy or abuse being substituted for factual record. Keep that in mind. Eulogy or abuse being substituted for factual record. So for the benefit of the emperor's subjects, I have decided to translate into Greek the books which I wrote some time ago. And okay, so you're right. This copy of Josephus is probably a later copy here, because he wrote the other one some time back. Who knows when this preface is written? Could be 78, 79, like you're saying, you know, because we don't know the earlier one. He said he wrote an earlier version in my native language, which is either Hebrew or Aramaic, I'm not sure which, for circulation in the Middle East. And look at how modern this sounds. I myself, Josephus, son of Matthias, am a Hebrew by race, a priest from Jerusalem. In the early stages I fought against the Romans, and later events I was an unwilling eyewitness. So he was a prisoner and he was an eyewitness, so his account is also an eyewitness account. But he's saying it's not falsified and it's not full of flattery, but he goes on to flatter the Romans totally. The upheaval, as I said, was the greatest of all time. When it occurred, Rome herself was in a most unsettled state. Jewish revolutionaries took advantage of the general disturbance. They had vast resources of men and money. Now, how do they have vast resources of men and money? Well, I think they were supported by the Eastern Persians and others who were undermining the Roman. It's like having the present day, Iranian regime giving the Lebanese Hezbollah support and weapons and stuff like that against the Roman Empire. He says they had vast resources, men we know why they had. Money, it's not clear. And so widespread was the ferment that some were filled with hope of gain, and others fear of loss by the state of affairs in the East. You see, this is the East. And he writes this for the Jews in the East, who obviously supported this. For the Jews expected all their, that's where the money's coming from, Mesopotamian brethren to join their insurrection. So he's talking about that Iraq, Mesopotamia. And I think in particular northern Iraq, in my book there is a conversion that takes place in a northern Iraq area called Adiabini. There's a queen that's very honored. Her name is Queen Helen of Adiabini. She converts to something in this period. And she sends her emissaries to Jerusalem in the 40s to relieve famine. She has a lot of money. She sends her treasury agents there. In the book of Acts, Paul goes up to Jerusalem in the 40s sometime to bring contributions for famine relief, he says. I believe Paul is among Queen Helen's emissaries to Jerusalem in this period to bring the famine relief. How would you know about Queen Helen's famine relief? It's in my books. It's in Josephus's Antiquities, and it's in the Talmud. It's in, particularly it's in the Antiquities and the Talmud. I have a whole chapter, book 20 of the Antiquities. It gives you the whole story of Queen Helen, her famine relief, and so on. And it's followed by certain revolutionary activities in the early and mid-40s that are very, very important for this period. So he says, something's going on. From another side, Roman supremacy was being challenged by the Gauls and the Celts in England, and etc. And in fact, after Nero's death, disorder reigned everywhere. There was civil war and so on. Presented with this opportunity, many aspired to the imperial throne, while the soldiery were eager for a transference of power as a means of enriching themselves. I therefore thought it inexcusable, when such issues were involved, to see the truth myths represented and to take no notice. Parthians, Babylonians, remotest Arabians, Babylonian Jews, Assyrians, thanks to my labors, were actually informed of the causes of the war, the sufferings it involved, and its disastrous ending. The reason is to teach them, don't mess with Rome. Don't mess with Rome. So first he wrote it to dissuade others in the East, where the Greeks and those Romans who took part in it remain ignorant of the facts, deluded with flattery or fiction. Again, the flattery or fiction theme here. Yet the writers I have in mind claim to be writing history, though beside getting all their facts wrong, they seem to me to miss the target altogether. See how modern this is? Of course, it's translated to modern language, but this is like a modern preface of a modern writer. The Romans were very far advanced in terms of writing at that time. I don't think you get writing like this till the 1700s. For they wish to establish the greatness of the Romans while at all time disparaging and deriding the actions of the Jews. But I do not see how men can prove themselves great by overcoming feeble opponents. That's the point. These others want to make their Jews look like pieces of junk, and the Romans want wonderful. Well, he does the same, but he still wants to emphasize the braveness of the Jews. Again, they're not impressed by the length of the war, the vastness of the Roman forces, which endured such hardships, the genius of the revolutionary commanders, whose strenuous endeavors before Jerusalem will bring them little glory if the difficulties the Roman commanders, if the difficulties they overcame are belittled. However, it is not my intention to counter the champions of the Romans by exaggerating the heroism of my own countrymen. I will state the facts accurately and impartially. Well, not quite. At the same time, the language in which I record events will reflect my own feelings and emotions. Now, this is another important point. For I must permit myself to bewail my country's tragedy, the beginning of the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. She was destroyed by internal dissension, and the Romans, who so unwillingly set fire to the temple. See, he says the Romans didn't want to burn down the temple. They did it unwillingly, because that would be a charge of sacrilege. Were brought in by the Jews' self-appointed leaders, as Titus Caesar, the temple's destroyer, has testified. For throughout the war he pitted the common people, Titus Caesar, his hero, who were helpless against the partisan forces, and over he delayed the capture of a city and prolonged the siege in the hope that the ringleaders would submit. If anyone criticizes me for accusations I bring against the party chief, the gangs of bandits, let's die, that kind of people who were crucified on either side of Jesus, or for my laments over the misfortunes of my country, you must pardon my weakness regardless of the rules of historical writing. For it so happened that of all cities under Roman rule, our own reached the highest summit of prosperity, and in turn fell to the lowest depths of misery. The misfortunes of all other races since the beginning of history compared to those of the Jews seem small wellness is still going on. But look at the last point. And for our misfortunes, we have only ourselves to blame. Mea culpa. That goes into the Gospels. His death be on our head and on our descendants, etc., 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 etc. The cry of, we're at fault. Not you, it's us who are at fault. And Josephus starts it right there. Why would he humiliate himself so much? I think because to survive in this period, you pretty much have to go that route. How then can I master my feelings? If anyone is disposed to pass harsh judgment on my emotion, he must remember the facts belong to destroyed. Only the grief is the writer's. He's in grief because the city has been destroyed and the temple has been destroyed. On the other hand, and he goes on with some other things. By the way, he starts the history in the next page, starting with Antiochus Epiphanes, who stormed Jerusalem, holding it for 3.5 years. There's the time, 2.5 times in Daniel that we were looking for in your class the other day. Were driven out of the country by the Asmoneans, the Maccabeans. I shall explain how the descendants, how their descendants, by their struggles for the throne, forced Pompey. It's always, they forced the Romans to intervene. The Romans didn't want to intervene. It's because of the Jews' dissension that the Romans intervened. So you never criticize the Roman leadership if you can avoid it. Antipater's son, Antipater was the Arab intermediary who brought the Romans in, brought Sosius and put an end to the Hasmonean dynasty and so on. So you can go through this whole extra thing, but mostly he, like in the last paragraph, I contrast the brutality of the party chiefs towards their countrymen with the clemency of the Romans. Read what the Romans did around the Sea of Galilee after they took it, if you wanted. They put all the old men and infirm and babies and others to the sword while they took all the rest of the people into slavery, the women and the able-bodied men. And they divided up the spoils between Vespasian, Agrippa II, the king we were talking about, and others. Just read his account of the fall of the cities around the Sea of Galilee. This supposed clemency and so on. And read the fun and games that he talks about after the fall of Jerusalem, when Titus had birthday celebrations for his brother, all up and down the Mediterranean coast at stadiums, and used all the Jewish captives for some fun and games in the stadiums and so on. Anyway, at the end he says, all this I have embraced in 7 books. To those who took part in the war or have ascertained the facts as I, left no ground for complaint or criticism. It is for those who love truth, not people who just want to be entertained, that I have written. I will now begin my story where I begin my summary. Anyway, so he says it's for those who love truth. His writing is for those who love truth. Well, comparatively speaking, maybe it was. So now, you do want to, if you can, remember that preface of Josephus. Let me just read you another bit from Josephus, a part about the different parties. I think we will find this in the Antiquities when he's talking about the Zealots. If I can find it here. I don't know if I can find it here quickly. Let's see if I can find it. Let's see, he's got the he talks about, let's see, after the tax, he gives the different sects here, book 18. He gives 2 discussions of the sects of Judaism. One is in book 18 of the Antiquities. The longer one, where he talks about the Essenes, is, I think, at the beginning of book 2 of the War. But he talks about the death. This all happens in the death of, a time of the death of Herod in 4 BC, which I'll read you from the Jewish War momentarily, next time probably. And the reason I'm doing this is because Jesus is supposed to be born either in 4 BC, which is around the time of the death of Herod. According to Matthew, Jesus is born in 4 BC. According to Luke, he's born at the time of the census, which would be 6 to 7 AD, when the Romans took direct control of Palestine, Judea, because they were fed up with the Herodian governors or kings or petty kings, whatever you want to call them, because they couldn't control the situation. So he says here, now Cyrenius, a Roman senator, this is in book 18, chapter 1 of the Antiquities, had gone through, one who had gone through other magistrates, passed through them until they had been consul and so on, came at that time into Syria with, with a few others, being sent by Caesar, meaning Augustus, to be a judge, and taking account of their substance. That's where they get the census under Cyrenius or Quirinius. Moreover, Cyrenius came himself to Judea, which was now added to the province of Syria, because they took this is 6 to 7 AD, to take an account of their substance and dispose of Archelaus, the last Herodian descendant there, before some later ones come back in. But the Jews, although at the beginning took the report of taxation very badly, yet did they leave off any further opposition to it by the persuasion of one Joazer, who was the son of one called Boethus, the high priest. So this is the high priests who the Herodians appointed. The reason that Joazer and Boethus were high priests is that Herod married the daughter of one of these Boethus, a second Miriam that he imported from Egypt after he killed the first Miriam, who was a Maccabean, who was his first wife. And he had 2 wives called Miriam or Mary. And the second one was an Egyptian, a daughter of an Egyptian Jewish high priestly family that was more accommodating. So her family member, this person called Joazer, and there was, as on one side of the dispute, there was another called Judas the Gaulonite, of the city by that name, which was Gamala, who taking with him one Sadduc, a Pharisee, became zealous to draw the people to revolt, and said that this taxation was no better than the introduction of slavery, and exhorted the nation to exert its liberty, as if this could procure them happiness and security for what they possessed, and an assured enjoyment of still greater good, which was that of the honor and glory they would acquire through their, if you want, their sacrifice, their martyrdom, if you want. They also said that God would not otherwise be assisting them upon their joining with another in such counsels as might be successful, etc., 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 etc. What he's saying here is that Judas and Sadduc, in war he only mentioned Judas, draw the people away on the tax issue, and that the establishment priests support the tax issue. Well, the tax issue is the basis of Jesus' birth moment in the Gospel of Luke. And Jesus is presented over and over again with a tax issue. So you see, this is all connected and a very burning issue. But to know this, who do you have to read? Unfortunately, Josephus. So I'm picking these little points out for you. For Judas and Sadduc, who excited a 4th philosophical sect among us, and had great many followers therein, filled our civil government with tumults at present, and laid the foundations of our future miseries. The one, he says, and we have only ourselves to blame in the war. By this system of philosophy, he calls it a system of philosophy, which we were before unacquainted with, we didn't know about before, concerning which I shall discourse a little. And this rather because the infection, the disease, Paul in the book of Acts is considered a disease carrier. Are you a disease carrier? The infection which spread thence among the younger people who were zealous, again zealous is used, for it, brought our country to destruction. So this all began, you see, not in 66. According to Josephus, this began when? In the period 4 to 7 AD, with the death of Herod and the unrest that followed it, the coming of the Romans to direct control in Palestine, like the Americans in Iraq, if you want, and then the insurrectionary movements that developed as a result of that, particularly as a result of the taxation. And this grew and grew and grew over 70 years. Don't forget, 70 is an important number in Daniel. Until the final outbreak of the war. At that point, he says, for the Jews had, for a while, 3 sects of philosophy. The Essenes, the Sadducees, and the Pharisees. I have already spoken of this in the second book of the Jewish War. Yeah, I said he goes into much more detail. But interestingly enough, he doesn't tell you anything about the Zealots, the fourth group, Judas and Zadok's group, at that point. He only tells you about the Essenes in great detail. But in this, you can read this yourself, but in this description in the Antiquities, maybe a decade or two later, he says that he says, he cuts a little bit away from the description of the Essenes in the war and adds it to the description of the Zealots in the Antiquities, which in fact he didn't even go into in the war. I'll show you that next time in the moment. Just a quick look at that. I'm just going to do 2 more things from Josephus. That description of the sects in the war and the uprising in the war of 4 BC, where the rabbinic leaders are burned to death by the Romans after the death of Herod. But let's just finish this little bit in the Antiquities. But of the 4th sect of Jewish philosophy, Judas the Galilean, that is this Judas the Gaulonite. Why does he call Judas the Gaulonite earlier? Where's Golan? The Golan Heights today. The Golan Heights was the area above the Sea of Galilee. We all hear about it because the Israelis and the Syrians and the Lebanese are all struggling for control of the Golan Heights. The main city in the Golan Heights was this town called Gamala. Josephus talks about it in his Jewish War and how he was supposed to defend it. Why was it called Gamala? It's in my book. I have a picture of it in both my new book and my previous book. Why was it called Gamala? Because in Arabic and Hebrew, Gamal is what word? Camel. Gamala. The reason it's called Gamala is because it's on a ridge that looks like the hump of a camel. It's on a ridge overlooking the Sea of Galilee that looks like the hump of a camel. He says Judas the Zealot, or Judas the Gaulonite, came from, or Judas the Galilean. We see he's not a Galilean because he doesn't come from Galilee. He comes from Gamala in the Golan. It's next door to Galilee, but it's not Galilee. So it looks like Galilean is also the name of the 4th sect, and the church fathers do have Galileans as another name for zealots. And interestingly enough, Jesus' followers are always being asked, are you Galileans? Remember Peter standing by the fire outside the high priest's house when Jesus is being condemned, and he says, are you a Galilean? And he says, no, I'm not a Galilean, I'm not one of those people, and so on and so forth. So they're always kind of confused about what does Galilee mean? An area? And in the Gospels it's normally an area. Or is it a revolutionary party? Which I think, in fact, it doubled. And that's where we have to think about these. I'll quickly read this and let you go. The 4th sect was founded by Judas the Galilean. That, I think, means the Galilean means he's a member of the Galilean party. These men agree in all other things with the Pharisee notions, but they have an inviolable attachment to liberty. That's the difference between them and the Pharisees. The Pharisees are willing to live under foreign rule. And they say that God is to be their only ruler. Only God rules here. So when Jesus gets the coin, what happens? He says, show me the coin. Whose picture is on the coin? Remember, shall we pay the tax? A fish comes out of the Sea of Galilee, take it out of the mouth, show it to Jesus. And he says, whose picture is on the coin? They say Caesar. So he says, render unto Caesar what is Caesar and God's what is God's. But what isn't said there is for the zealot, nothing is Caesar in Palestine. Everything is God. God rules here, not Caesar. See, he said here, they have an inviolable attachment to liberty, and they say that God is their only ruler or Lord, though they don't honor Caesar at all. So you could say, Jesus says, he who has ears, let him hear. You could say in analysis of that particular episode that Jesus is also saying nothing goes to Caesar. They also do not, because for the 4th sect, render to Caesar what is Caesar, render to God what is God's, Caesar what is Caesar's, everything is God's, nothing is Caesar. They also do not value, we'll talk about it in more detail later on, but I just want to read it in relation to this. They also do not value any kind of debt, nor indeed do they heed the deaths of their relations and friends, nor can any such fear make them call any man Lord. Nobody is Lord. No man is Lord. Therefore, in the Gospels, calling Jesus Lord would be outlawed by these people. They will not call any man Lord. You have to read these things really. And since this immovable resolution of theirs is well known to a great many, I shall speak no further about that matter, because he was an interrogator prisoner. He knew all about their immovable resolution. Or am I afraid that anything I have said about them should be disbelieved, but rather fear that what I have said it is beneath the resolution they show when they undergo torture. And it was in Cassius Floris's time, in the 60s, that the nation began to grow wild with this distemper. And he was our procurator, and he occasioned the Jews to go wild, making by the abuse of his authority to make them revolt against the Romans. And these are the second church philosophy. So look, he says lots of things there, but mainly says that the Roman governors goaded the Jews into revolt against Rome. But these extreme Jews didn't mind dying death of any kind, and they would call no man Lord. Who do they resemble in Christianity? They're the first martyrs. They don't mind undergoing any torture. And they prefer death to, any kind of betrayal or so on and so forth. Okay, sorry, let you go. And again, bring your Gospels and finish up Josephus, and we'll read Jesus' birth.